Hello, welcome to Project Poseidon's Channel Aquarius, the show where we try to bring some grounded sense of rationality to fringe subjects. I'm your host, Dave the Dude, and this is indeed our first episode. Where I am, it's late, it's quiet, the coffee's on, and the mood is mostly mellow. We have a lot of material to cover, so we'll dive right in. But first, let me set the stage with a general mission statement. This show is about the fringe. Topics I hope we'll be covering in coming episodes include conspiracy theories, UFOs, the paranormal, science, spirituality, the nature of consciousness, the nature of reality, the fate of the planet, the trajectory of human evolution, and I have to admit a personal fondness for the theories and work of Carl Jung, a man who I think will prove to have been a good 200 years ahead of his time. Covering fringe topics, will prove to be tricky, I think. If you've delved into fringe stuff at all, you will have noticed that there is a great deal of bullshit out there to wade through. Almost endless amounts of it, in fact. And yet, astute observation is possible if you avoid committing to one narrative or another, stay tentatively neutral, and continue your investigation. Here at Project Poseidon, our view in a nutshell is that cognitive dissonance is a psychological phenomenon that actually underpins most human disagreements. Cognitive dissonance basically is the tendency to ignore, rationalize, avoid, or hallucinate away information that contradicts strongly held beliefs or morals. Whether by nature or nurture, it seems that our default setting is to believe things, and we tend to block out any incoming information that's inconsistent with our belief system. This is true of fundamentalist zealots and political ideologists, but it's also true of atheists, skeptics, and yes, even scientists. Science has a long history of prosecuting heresies that later were validated as scientific models, and yet widespread belief in the infallibility of the scientific community persists. Taking a page from the late great sage Robert Anton Wilson, we hold that when dogma enters the brain, intellectual activity ceases. Beliefs are, in effect, a form of brain damage, and the wise man understands the need to hold opinions in place of convictions. Conviction makes convicts. Now, I should also acknowledge that it is perhaps better to be doubtful than completely credulous, and that the need to be open-minded will always exist in some tension with the need to be a critical thinker. But perhaps we can manage to hold stories lightly, so to speak. Assume that even what we think we know for sure is falsifiable, and thus avoid having an ideological crisis every time we come across new information. It is, after all, the information age, and if your opinion of the world and its workings is the same now as it was 10 years ago, you probably haven't been using the internet properly. New perspectives on everything can be had at the push of a button. Go on, push the button. I dare you. Alright, so moving on. There are a couple of stories I want to talk about that have been in the news recently. The first one is called Mysterious Ancient Geoglyphs Discovered in Kazakhstan Leave Archaeologists Perplexed. This comes to us via IFL Science. I fucking love science. You know that these guys are good, reliable source of information because they love science. I wish I could show you the pictures that go with this story. I can't. They're pretty cool. The story reads, more than 50 remarkable ancient earthworks have been discovered in Kazakhstan, although archaeologists are at a loss to explain who made them and for what purpose. The geoglyphs, which have been likened to the famous Nazca lines of Peru, are scattered across a vast area of the Kazakh steppe, and were first discovered by archaeology enthusiast Dmitry Day using Google Earth. An international team of researchers from the Lithuanian Institute of History and Kostanay University in Kazakhstan are now attempting to decipher the age, meaning, and function of the man-made features, yet have so far been left scratching their heads. Speaking to Live Science, archaeologists Irina Shevnina and Andrew Logvin explained that we can say only one thing. The geoglyphs were built by ancient people. By whom and for what purpose remains a mystery. This uncertainty has led to speculation and disagreement about the nature of the earthworks. Day and the team at Kostanay claim they could be up to 8,000 years old, based on how much the mounds have eroded and the age of Neolithic flints found at the sites and built as part of a sun-worshipping cult. However, Dr. Gidry Motuzate, I'll never pronounce this. Alright, he's a doctor, Gidry somebody, of the Lithuanian Institute of History, disputes this and dates them at under 2,000 years old, using a different method called luminescence dating, which looks at exposure to sunlight over time. She told National Geographic that they may have been built as a kind of landmark, something that could be seen from river valleys far away. Among the structures are a number of crosses, rings, and a hooked cross that resembles an ancient swastika. This symbol has been found at ancient archaeological sites across the world, ranging from engravings on Hindu temples to Nordic stone carvings, and has been associated with a number of different meanings that are not related to its modern negative connotations. Okay, so again, that's from IFL Science. And I think I'll leave that to speak for itself. Though maybe we can file it under object lessons as, gee, I guess we don't really know as much about our own past as maybe we thought we did. Next article I wanted to bring to your attention is from phys.org. It says, no Big Bang? Question mark. No Big Bang? Quantum equation predicts universe has no beginning. Okay, so I think Terence McKenna said of the Big Bang that it was patently absurd. I mean, first there was nothing that exploded and then expanded into nothing, becoming something, and you know, it's like science is saying, gee, we have no clue, but give us one free miracle and we'll take it from there. We can explain everything else. So I think, well, never mind what I think. Let me read the article. The universe may have existed forever, according to a new model that applies quantum correction terms to complement Einstein's theory of general relativity. The model may also account for dark matter and dark energy, resolving multiple problems at once. The widely accepted age of the universe, as estimated by general relativity, is 13.8 billion years. In the beginning, everything in existence is thought to have occupied a single infinitely dense point or singularity. Only after this point began to expand in a Big Bang did the universe officially begin. Although the Big Bang singularity arises directly and unavoidably from the mathematics of general relativity, some scientists see it as problematic because the math can explain only what happened immediately after, not at or before the singularity. The Big Bang singularity is the most serious problem of general relativity because the laws of physics appear to break down there. Ahmed Farag Ali at Benna University and the Zawal City of Science and Technology, both in Egypt, told phys.org. Ali and co-author Sorya Das at the University of Lethbridge in Alberta, Canada, have shown in a paper published in Physics Letters B that the Big Bang singularity can be resolved by their new model in which the universe has no beginning and no end. The physicists emphasize that their quantum correction terms are not applied ad hoc in an attempt to specifically eliminate the Big Bang singularity. Their work is based on ideas by the theoretical physicist David Bohm, who is also known for his contributions to the philosophy of physics. Starting in the 1950s, Bohm explored replacing classical geodesics, the shortest path between 2 points on a curved surface, with quantum trajectories. In their paper, Ali and Das applied these Bohmian trajectories to an equation developed in the 1950s by physicist Amal Kumar Raichaudhuri at Presidency University in Kolkata, India. Raichaudhuri was also Das's teacher when he was an undergraduate student of that institution in the 90s. Using the quantum-corrected Raichaudhuri equation, Ali and Das derived quantum-corrected Friedmann equations. Friedmann, I don't know. Let's go Friedmann. Friedmann equations, which describe the expansion and evolution of the universe, including the Big Bang, within the context of general relativity. Got that? So although it's not a true theory of quantum gravity, the model does contain elements from both quantum theory and general relativity. Ali and Das also expect their results to hold even if and when a full theory of quantum gravity is formulated. In addition to not predicting a Big Bang singularity, the new model does not predict a Big Crunch singularity either. In general relativity, one possible fate of the universe is that it starts to shrink until it collapses in on itself in a big crunch and becomes an infinitely dense point once again. Ali and Das explain in their paper that their model avoids singularities because of a key difference between classical geodesics and Bohmian trajectories. Classical geodesics eventually cross each other, and the points at which they converge are singularities. In contrast, Bohmian trajectories never cross each other, so singularities do not appear in the equations. In cosmological terms, the scientists explain that the quantum corrections can be thought of as a cosmological constant term without the need for dark energy, and a radiation term. These terms keep the universe at a finite size and therefore give it an infinite age. The terms also make predictions that agree closely with current observations of the cosmological constant and density of the universe. Do I need to go further? I don't think so. There's some stuff about a new gravity particle, yada yada. The model describes the universe as being filled with a quantum fluid. The scientists propose that this fluid might be composed of gravitons. Okay. So, a controversial hypothesis. What's encouraging is that, there are scientists out there who are still pushing, thinking about things differently, willing to question the orthodoxy of the day, give a middle finger to Stephen Hawking and those of his ilk who feel that everything is all figured out and all that's left is, details. I'm reminded here of my favorite Onion article of all time. I'll pull it up. Study. All of your memories implanted in you 5 minutes ago when universe was created. Challenging years of research examining the cognitive and biological processes underlying human memory A new study by researchers at Georgetown University has found that all experiences of the past stored in a person's mind are in fact information artificially implanted 5 minutes ago when our universe was first created. Previous studies suggest that human memories are created over time through the formation of neuronal connections enhanced and strengthened through meaningful association, but our research suggests that all of our perceptions of the past, including recollections of important life milestones and learned knowledge of events in human history, were in fact inserted into our brains at the universe's exact moment of creation a little more than 5 minutes ago. 5 minutes and 13 seconds ago, to be exact, said lead researcher Dr. John Isherwood of the study's findings, which, like all cognitive research he and his team believe they had conducted in the past, was manufactured and implanted in his brain just over 300 seconds ago when the cosmos and all its contents, and indeed all of existence itself, first came into being. I won't continue reading that, but I think you get the point. I can't speak for anyone but myself, but the more I think about reality and what it is, the more I feel like I'm the butt of a joke, or in on a joke. One or the two. Maybe both. Okay, this next story is pretty fantastic. The headline reads, "Scientists claim they can change your belief on immigrants and God with magnets." That's right. Attitudes, from the Express, the article reads, "Attitudes towards God and immigrants can be changed by beaming magnetic waves into the brain," scientists have claimed. A bizarre experiment claims to be able to make Christians no longer believe in God and make Britons open their arms to migrants, in experiments some may find a threat to their values. Scientists, that's right, Christians, we're going to suck God out of your brain with magnets. Bahaha. Scientists looked at how the brain resolves abstract ideological problems. Using a technique called transcranial magnetic stimulation, researchers safely shut down certain groups of neurons in the brains of volunteers. TMS, which is used to treat depression, involves placing a large electromagnetic coil against the scalp, which creates electric currents that stimulate nerve cells in the region of the brain involved in mood control. Researchers found the technique radically altered religious perceptions and prejudice. Belief in God was reduced almost by a third, while participants became 28.5% less bothered by immigration numbers. Dr. Kaiza Izuma from the University of York said, "People often turn to ideology when they are confronted by problems. We wanted to find out whether a brain region that is linked with solving concrete problems, like deciding how to move one's body to overcome an obstacle, is also involved in solving abstract problems addressed by ideology." The scientists targeted the posterior medial frontal cortex, a brain region a few inches up from the forehead that is associated with detecting and responding to problems. Volunteers were asked to rate their belief in God, heaven, the devil, and hell after undergoing pre-screening to ensure that they held religious convictions. Dr. Izuma said, "We decided to remind people of death because previous research has shown that people turn to religion for comfort in the face of death. As expected, we found that when we experimentally turned down the posterior medial frontal cortex, people were less inclined to reach for comforting religious ideas despite having been reminded of death." The American participants were also shown 2 essays written by newly arrived immigrants, one highly complimentary of the U.S. and the other extremely critical. Dr. Izuma said, "When we disrupted the brain region that usually helps detect and respond to threats, we saw a less negative, less ideologically motivated reaction to the critical author and his opinions." The research, published in the journal Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience, that was a mouthful, sorry, Social Cognitive and Affective Neuroscience is the name of the journal, And the research published therein suggests our brains use the same basic mental pathways to solve practical problems such as following directions or ideological issues such as immigration and religion. Lead author Dr. Colin Holbrook from the University of California at Los Angeles said, "These findings are very striking and consistent with the idea that brain mechanisms that evolve for relatively basic threat response functions are repurposed to also produce ideological reactions." Now, I'm rather reminded of Robert Anton Wilson's statement that shortening ideology to idiocy would save a little bit of space and add a great deal to clarity. Wouldn't it be something if you could zap people's brains with a magnet just before they went into a voting booth? Have them actually vote on the issues rather than on whatever nonsense is going through their heads. I'm reminded of a quote. Let me see if I can find it. Mark Pesce, writing in the disinformation grimoire, had an essay called Rhetoric and Reason. Trying to remember the name of the book. Anyways, the essay is called Rhetoric and Reason, and he writes, "A few weeks before I wrote this essay, I had a private conversation with a neurophysiologist at UCSD who passed along some stunning insights he'd gathered from his research on the human brain. It seems that although we like to perceive ourselves as rational, reasonable creatures, carefully weighing our decisions before we commit, the fact of the matter is precisely the inverse. We arrive at our decisions through emotional sensations, acting from the gut at all times. Our reason enters the process only after the decision has been made and acts as the mind's propagandist, convincing us of the utter rightness which underlies all of our actions. Beyond this, reason has a social function to convince others that our actions are correct. Friends, Romans, countrymen, lend me your ears, not so that you can think for yourselves, but that I might instruct you what to believe." I wonder if people who study the brain extensively wind up a little cynical about human nature. At some point in the future, I would like to talk about Michael Persinger. I don't know if you've heard of him. He's professor at Laurentian University up here in Canada. He invented the God helmet, the Corin helmet, I think it's called. Anyways, you put a helmet on your head, it's got rotating magnets, and you have a spiritual experience of some kind as a result of this thing. Interesting man. He's done interesting work, and I'd certainly like to cover that topic in some depth at some point. Today, though, I did promise you that this was going to be a show that delved into things like conspiracy theories, and I believe I have a pretty good anecdote to kick things off. This is sort of about one of the granddaddy conspiracy theories. So, yeah, let's start by getting a few ground rules straight. I've heard that most, if not all, philosophical discussions are eventually resolved by coming to an agreement on what words mean and what terms mean. And that kind of makes sense when you think about it. Our language kind of shapes how we think and interface with the universe, doesn't it? So, let's talk about this term conspiracy theorist. It's usually used, conspiracy theory is usually used in the pejorative to denigrate and marginalize the opinions of people who have an alternative view of history and politics. Those who sling the term around, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're a kook, you're a nut, but specifically who use the term conspiracy theorist haven't really thought deeply about what's coming out of their mouths, it seems to me. Even in the normative usage of the term, it does not stretch the imagination that much to suppose that people of means and power will collude privately in order to exert that power. As George Carlin said, I wish I could find the clip. Hey, maybe I can. Let's see. I think I'll just read it out. I'm not that technically proficient yet. Limits of debate in this country, says George Carlin, are established before the debate even begins, and everyone else is marginalized and made to seem as either a communist, a kook, some sort of disloyal person, or a conspiracy theorist. Something that shouldn't even be entertained for a minute is that powerful people might get together and have a plan. Doesn't happen. You're a kook and a conspiracy buff. Right. So, couldn't agree more. There is evidence, and you can look this up on the Google if you have 10 seconds to spare and the inclination to do so. CIA document 1035-960. Google that. The document is pretty conclusive in showing that the term conspiracy theorist was invented and pushed by the CIA in the first place in order to demonize public skepticism of the Warren Commission's investigation of John F. Kennedy's death. Now, pretty much anyone of critical bent who's looked closely at the JFK assassination comes away with the distinct impression that there was some sort of funny business going on, and maybe good reason for the aforementioned public skepticism. So, I don't shrink from the label conspiracy theorist. I sort of embrace it. Now, that said, there's this kind of spectrum right now of fringe opinions. And on, one side of the spectrum you've got pretty relatively mainstream stuff like the JFK assassination and, the Twin Towers, 9/11 and all that. And on the other end of the spectrum are, David Icke with his lizard people theory, and somebody I know is trying to convince me that the Earth is actually flat, and I've never been never found the chemtrails thing too convincing, I gotta say. So yeah, there's some pretty wacky stuff out there, but I'll tell you what sort of got me looking at the world a little differently, and the event that sort of turned me into one of them. Personal anecdote that I'll share with you, and then make some observations about what's implied in the broader sense. So, the first thing you should know is that I'm a Canadian citizen. I've lived most of my life in Ottawa, Ontario, the nation's capital. And in the year 2000 and in 2001, I was employed at a supervisory level at a media monitoring firm that was contracted to National Defense, the PMO, that's the Office of the Prime Minister, the Treasury Board, and other government clients, as well as to numerous corporate clients, so like Big Tobacco and Bombardier and some others. It was a borderline evil job, but media monitoring meant I had a bird's eye view of the nightly news across Canada. Basically, there were people who worked under me who watched the news and assembled typed up summaries of all the news articles and then sent them to me, and I would wade through all of the summaries of all the broadcast news across Canada and decide what stories would go to which clients. So I'd stumbled into this job by accident at a time when the company was in some upheaval. I didn't hold a security clearance of any kind. I should make that clear. At the time, I had been friends for 6 years or so with several fellows from the Maryland area of the United States. One of them had obtained a doctorate degree in history and had gone to work at the Pentagon as a strategic planner. Let's call him Joe. Because he and I both worked odd hours at stressful jobs, we stayed in pretty much constant communication over the internet during the 2000 to 2001 period. You know, it's 4 in the morning, you're taking a break from shoveling through piles and piles of information that are he's doing his thing, and alright, we played World of Warcraft kind of type game together. It wasn't World of Warcraft exactly, because I don't think that was around in 2000, but yeah, it was an online fantasy game that we, got together and killed monsters. Anyways, it's possible that this friend of mine assumed I had a security clearance of some sort to be doing the work I was doing. I don't know what he was thinking to tell me as much as he did, honestly. But after he swore me to secrecy, he told me some pretty eyebrow-raising stuff. So this is a record of my observations and experiences in those days. First of all, in the year 2000, a few weeks after George W. Bush won the election, my friend Joe was very excited. He related to me, hey man, we've got a whole new strategy coming in. He told me that plans were being drawn up to invade Iraq, Afghanistan, and one other nation, which he wouldn't name. He said all options were on the table. That really had him excited as well. He said that nuclear airbursts as a ground clearing measure had been openly discussed. What? That's what they do in the Pentagon, apparently, is they sit around and talk about how many nukes it'll take to clear up the situation. Under the strictest confidence, he indicated that invisibility cloak prototypes were going to be used for special forces operations. He told me that if I ever told anyone that I would, probably disappear or something. Now, just as an aside, I know that it was only a year or two ago that they announced that they actually had invisibility cloak prototypes on the way. So that should give you some indication, if my friend's story was true, of sort of how far ahead the Pentagon is technologically of the rest of the world. Anyways, when asked about the morality of this project of his. I basically said, dude, that, you know, how are you gonna sell that to the plebes? And you're gonna go to war, and like, we're at peace right now, and the Cold War's over, and how is this gonna work? And his answer was basically, well, look, I'm a dedicated absolutist. Might's the only right in human affairs. And I said, okay, but like, how are you going to convince the public of that? They sort of need something to rally them, don't they? And he said, well, just keep an eye on the news, and should be perfectly apparent in August of 2001 or thereabouts. Your question will be answered, but I can't say more than that right now. So, yeah, I don't know if this relates or not. Shortly after that, I covered a news item for the Treasury Board. I remember this really distinctly. George Bush had met with Alan Greenspan of the Federal Reserve, and the video was shown of George coming out of that meeting. He's clapping Alan on the back and mugging for the cameras. Alan Greenspan looked like he had just swallowed something very unpleasant. He wasn't a happy man in that video. 2 days later, though, so I think George Bush must have reamed him or told him something he didn't like, but 2 days later the Fed hiked interest rates sharply, citing the need to let some air out of the economy because the red-hot market would not survive, for example, the sudden blow of a massive terrorist attack. Very prescient, eh? 2 months later, the dot-com crash was well underway. In the weeks leading up to September 11th, 2001, my friend Joe was very busy. He wasn't around to kill monsters that much. He made a point of checking in every morning, though, at approximately 4 o'clock in the morning to say hello. How are you doing? That kind of thing. And then, of course, the morning of September 11th, he was not there. So, I didn't think much of it, but it's like, oh, where's Joe today? He's not here. Well, it's late, I'm going to go home, And then, so I go home at 5 in the morning. I go to sleep. Awakened, of course, by a phone call from my office manager at about 10:30 the following morning. The sky's falling. There's a terrorist attack. So, curious about what was going on, I went back into the office. I only lived a block away to watch the news and see what was happening. Once I sort of saw what was going on, my first thing was to try to see if my friend Joe was safe or not. He logged on in the early evening on September 12th and told me, oh yeah, I'm fine, everything's fine, I survived. My office is now a smoldering ruin. I guess his office was right in the path of the airplane or whatever it was that hit the Pentagon. So yeah, his office totally destroyed, but he was fine. When I sort of pushed him to find out why, he indicated that he'd been off-site conducting war games at the time of the attack. Okay, so at this point I'm putting a few dots together, and I directly ask him, hey, look, this, you told me there was something coming that would, be pretty attention-catching, then be used as an excuse to go to war. Is this what you were talking about? And he said, no, of course not. I could never be party to something like this. What do you think of me? And then I said, well, I don't know, you're an absolutist, you think might makes right. Yeah, you could probably be part of something like this. Anyways, he probably took some offense to that because he never spoke to me again, and I've lost touch with him since. But in the weeks following, I did just in the course of my duties as a media monitor, I found a story in the international edition of Time magazine that is, I think, from October 20. My memory's fuzzy, but I think it was October 21st. International edition of Time magazine. Article about the attacks. The official reason given by the White House to Time magazine for the failure of air defenses around the Pentagon on 9/11 is that war games were being conducted in an off-site bunker that morning, and the war games were a simulation of an attack on the Twin Towers of the WTC by hijacked airliners. According to the White House, the actual terrorist attack was piggybacked on the virtual terrorist attack. This is the given reason why the SAM batteries that protect the Pentagon failed to work. Now, that's coming right from the Pentagon, right? So I'm not making this up. A few other quick observations based on things that stood out for me. In the days following 9/11, Pakistan refused to allow America access to its borders. America said, we want to, use you as a base to go after Al-Qaeda or whoever did this. Pakistan said no way. In quick succession, over a few days, the news reported mysterious deaths of Pakistani embassy workers in 3 countries. One was in South Africa, one was in Chile, and one was in Ottawa, Canada, where I was living and working. The death in Ottawa occurred 2 blocks from my office in the following manner. The embassy worker was hit from opposite directions by 2 cars simultaneously at a busy intersection. Both cars were driving at high speed. His death was ruled an accident. The next day, Pakistan agreed to allow America access to its borders. What else? I distinctly remember that although America had just been attacked, Congress was nearly empty on the day that emergency powers were approved for the president. For the most part, the members of Congress were on vacation at the time. This is how the Patriot Act was passed into law. That was something I do remember asking Joe about, and his response was, well, Congress still passed it. Doesn't matter if they were all on vacation. Still legal. So I was a little naive, right? I was a little shocked by what I was seeing unfold. This story was sent to the Prime Minister's office by another supervisor in our company, the print media guy. Several regional newspapers ran stories. I can't think of an example offhand, but like the Fredericton Herald, or the dinky little newspapers that really must have a readership of like 10,000 people tops. Anyways, the story kept running in all these regional newspapers, aimed at dispelling these insistent rumors that this was simply the latest chapter in an ancient war between assassins and Freemasons. This particular theory was also soundly ridiculed on a very special episode of The West Wing, which aired shortly after the attacks. So, I never knew what to make of that, but I thought it seemed strange that The West Wing would be going out of its way to dismiss a theory that nobody I knew was seriously entertaining at the time. Look, I swear everything I've said here is the truth to the best of my ability to recollect. I don't have proof that 9/11 was an inside job, but knew a guy working in the Pentagon who told me in 2000, we're going to go to war, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, and just watch what happens. And then, bam-o. So, make of it what you will. It's interesting that even having experienced these things firsthand, it still took me a couple of years, honestly, to really get my head around, this was a false flag attack, and it was just, the scale of it was mind-boggling. How could they do something like that and keep it a secret? Turns out it's not that hard, really. People are pretty dense, especially when, our buddy cognitive dissonance gets involved, and people have beliefs about the rightness of their way of life and the rightness of their civilization, and so, like, I've just told you, basically, from my experience, that 9/11 was an inside job. I'm blabbing. I'm telling you the truth, and how many minds is that going to change? Probably 0. Yeah, I'm not expecting to convince anyone who hasn't already looked closely at the 9/11 narrative and done a little bit of critical thinking about it. So, call me a liar if you want. I'm not bothered by that, but cognitive dissonance keeps secrets pretty well. And also, take a look at the Manhattan Project, for example. You had several 100,000 people involved in that, working in compartmentalized conditions under the strictest secrecy. Threats of fines, maybe threats to your family. Keeps secrets pretty well. But there's videos of firefighters on YouTube talking about explosions in the lobbies of the buildings. Hasn't made too big a difference. There's pretty funny video of the BBC reporting on the collapse of the World Trade Center 7 building, some 20 minutes or so before it actually happened. That hasn't seemed to make a dent in the narrative. The 9/11 Commission didn't even mention WTC 7. Well, it's like a glaring omission. Honestly, there's so many holes in the official 9/11 story that you could, I don't know. I'm gonna make a joke about sponges and holding water, and it's really, really stupid. If you look at 9/11 and think, you can get past the cognitive dissonance and think critically about it, it's really, really obvious something funny was going on. So, why isn't it common knowledge that it was an inside job? Because people are dense, and that's how you keep secrets in the modern age. You just make the lie big enough that people swallow it. Hitler said that, right? He said the bigger the whopper you tell, the more eagerly people will gobble it up. So, yeah, pretty depressing. So, I think that's all we're going to cover today. I feel good about this first outing. I hope you guys will stick around, and Hopefully we'll have some guests and cover some other interesting topics in future shows. I think I'm going to go out with the same music that we came in. Until we meet again, I would strongly exhort you to keep the lasagna flying, to question everything rigorously, and to be open-minded, but not so open-minded that your brain falls on the floor. Once again, I'm Dave the Dude. This is Project Poseidon's Channel Aquarius, and it has been my absolute pleasure to spend this time with you. Have a good night, and I'll see you on the flip side.